The Lover's card from the Tarot's Major Arcana holds a special place in my heart, mainly because of its themes of love, connection, intimacy, and vulnerability. Beyond its romantic connotations, it also represents the blending of seemingly opposing forces, which lends to a powerful metaphysical significance. Throughout human history, the symbolism of unity has been central to most spiritual traditions, from ancient paganism to monotheism. The Sanskrit word for yoga translates to union, and the Taoist yin-yang symbol invokes the balance of polarities. In esoteric Christian symbolism, the cross represents the merging of spirit and matter, with Christ as a symbol of humanity's connection to the divine. These examples highlight the importance of a shared theme that brings together the paradoxes of life. They also emphasize the crucial role of reconciliation and harmony. From the eternal polarity between man and woman, to the never-ending war between progress and tradition, our unconscious spirituality realizes that life is a game of polarities, and despite the great difficulties of navigating these opposing forces, our cultural and religious symbolism suggests that deep down, all we really want to do is find a way to make peace. The field of analytical psychology, born from the pioneering work of Carl Jung, with its sights set on the unification of the psyche. It's a discipline that delves into the enigmatic realm of the unconscious, the vast ocean of myths, dreams, and archetypes. For what purpose, you might ask? Well, to mend the fractured pieces of the human psyche. To help individuals navigate the treacherous waters of existence and emerge from the dangerous tides as whole beings. But sadly, when we shift the Jungian lens from the individual to the broader culture, what do we see? A pervasive tendency towards fragmentation and discord. A cultural current that threatens to undermine the very notion of wholeness itself. The polarities that we must confront in life, light-dark, order and chaos, love and fear, man and woman, left and right, are being used as a means of division rather than synthesis. Instead of seeking unity through diversity, we are being driven apart by our differences, encouraged to take sides, to label ourselves and others, to create more borders. And the noble pursuit of integration, of weaving a tapestry of diverse threads into a harmonious whole, is being undermined by divisive forces that seek to unravel it. But it doesn't have to be this way. The Lover's card, as well as other unity symbols throughout human history, show us that reconciling opposites is not only possible, but it's imperative. And before I get accused of being wishy-washy, it's not about pretending as if differences don't exist. It's about acknowledging that each side contains its counterpart. It's about finding common ground and working towards synthesis. It's disheartening to see that the current political climate is a glaring example of how far we've strayed from the path towards balance and harmony that's been hinted at throughout our spiritual history. Nowadays, there's an increasing pressure to choose a tribe based on gender, sexuality, race, or political affiliation. Unity symbols, if at all, are only palatable to specific, isolated groups. The imagery of the Taoist yin-yang, or the Tarot's lovers, offers a stark contrast to the symbols of this era, because they represent the unity of genuinely opposing forces, striving towards synthesis, acknowledging that both sides contain elements of their other. The idea of reconciling polarities in this day and age is far too often dismissed as wishy-washy or viewed as a naive centrist fantasy. Differences are seen as irreconcilable, and those perceived as ideological or cultural adversaries are branded as irredeemable. A tragedy is unfolding before our eyes in the realm of contemporary politics, and this tragedy has come to us in the form of a meme. One that has metastasized its falsehoods all over the culture. The political spectrum. The cursed political spectrum. I know everyone has seen this thing floating around, and I know many of you will probably recoil at the idea that I'm saying it's fake, especially because you probably identify at some point on its axis. But let's take a closer look at the logic behind this thing. First of all, the whole idea that there's a unifying philosophy or principle that can be represented on a single axis is complete and utter rubbish. It is based on the debunked essentialist notion that all political issues stem from one underlying essence, tying them all together into a neat little spectrum of left and right. But in reality, our political affiliations aren't based on some fundamental principle, like order versus liberty or realism versus idealism. They're just a product of the tribe we belong to. The less we know about the political spectrum and the less tribal we are, the less likely our beliefs will align with the traditional left and right designations. And if you need proof, just look at this study by the University of Pennsylvania, which showed that people don't have consistent political views until they're socialized into the left-wing, right-wing binary. In other words, the political spectrum is just a big joke that we're all complicit in. But that's not the only problem. This meme has also splintered the collective psyche into opposing factions, fueling the dangerous level of polarization we're witnessing today. It's created a landscape where people are encouraged to cling to identities and to constantly generate new and increasingly bizarre ones to stay ahead of the curve. And let's not forget about the self-proclaimed gurus and thought leaders who are taking advantage of this climate by selling their own brand of empty purpose to the desperate and searching masses. I don't bring up these grievances simply to seem superior or to elevate myself above other people. The internet really is like a modern labyrinth, and it does suck you in with aesthetics, movements, ideals, only to toss you aside and leave you feeling confused afterwards. I know a thing or two about feeling the pressure to conform to your tribe, and in my experience, it's never worth it. Especially if it means sacrificing your intellectual curiosity and creativity, all for the benefit of fitting into some algorithmic landscape. Being lumped into the algorithmic landscape of the left and feeling the pressure to conform to my designated digital tribe made me realize that I didn't really fit in, but I also didn't really want to either. The fallacy of the left-right dichotomy fails to capture the complexity of my being. I was raised in an incredibly conservative Nigerian household, but I also grew up in multicultural metropolitan cities. I spent my childhood in about 4 different countries. I went to a British private boarding school. I also went to an American public high school. I've seen quite a bit when it comes to different sides of life. And on top of that, I'm also of mixed heritage and cultural backgrounds. I've seen both the upsides and the downsides of metropolitan progressive ideals and traditional conservative cultural ideals, which has inspired me in my own personal life to try and find a synthesis of both, to find harmony in these two seemingly conflicting polarities. But in a society where egos are deeply rooted and invested in fragmentation and polarization, this middle path approach is often met with disdain. As an outsider in both cultural contexts, I've been obliged to confront the polarized nature of modern life in a way that others are able to ignore. The internet in particular has become a source of intense polarization, with people finding themselves drawn into the dark and unyielding confines of extremist ideology. This predicament has brought me to an understanding of the fundamental flaw in the current political paradigm. It's a flaw that results in a collective psychological state characterized by chaos and fragmentation. There's an urgent need for us to question the validity of the current paradigm and to seek a new path forward that is grounded in the recognition of the complexity and diversity of the human experience. Desperate for a way out of this spiritual malaise, I embarked on a journey that led me back to the work of Carl Jung. As a renowned psychoanalyst, mystic, and philosopher, his words have always resonated deeply with me, particularly his concept of the shadow. It was only in my immersion in the online political sphere that I fully grasped the importance of this idea. that the dark side of individuals, groups, and ideologies must be confronted. My fascination with analytical psychology, founded by Jung, stems from its emphasis on integration, the fusion of opposing forces within the psyche. It seemed to me that his teachings hold the key to breaking free from the rigid polarities that are currently plaguing society, and the shadows that plague our collective unconscious as a result. Over the summer, I had the pleasure of convening a book club with patrons of the channel and patrons of my new podcast, Mystic and the Machine. By some twist of fate, we ended up voting to read Carl Jung's Red Book, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most mind-blowing experiences I've ever had. None of us realized when we chose to read this book that it was literally going to shake us to our core and challenge just about every notion that we have about society. The Red Book is not just a book, it's a transformative journey. A journey that will probably leave you changed forever. The sheer amount of information contained within its pages about the nature of the psyche is absolutely staggering. For almost the entire summer, the patrons and I dedicated every Sunday to attempting to unpick the esoteric messages that Jung bequeathed humanity about the unconscious drives that steer our culture. And it was a ride like no other, one that left us a little madder, admittedly, but also wiser at the same time. So prepare yourself, for what follows in this video may seem a little strange and esoteric. Yet so is life, especially right now. And sometimes the only way to truly understand a chaotic and confusing time like the present is to journey down the rabbit hole, to explore the arcane mysteries that lie hidden beneath the surface. And that is precisely the journey that Jung himself undertook, culminating in his inception of the Red Book. The Red Book, also known as Liber Novus in Latin, which means the new book, is a mysterious collection of musings, vivid imagery and sermons that sprang from Jung's active imagination excursions between the years 1914 and 1930. During this period, Jung experienced a personal crisis that drove him to enter what he called his depths, leave behind his successful and acclaimed professional life as a psychoanalyst, and pursue his inner world. So what exactly inspired arguably one of the world's most influential psychiatrists at the time to go completely schizo and produce a book full of arcane references to Kabbalah and Gnosticism? Well, like us, Jung lived through an incredibly turbulent period of history, one that tested his resolve and forced him on a journey inward to uncover the keys to reconciling the opposites, a motif that he constantly ran into during his long career analyzing archetypes and dreams. The Swiss psychiatrist was the pioneering figure in the field of analytical psychology, and became legendary for his groundbreaking work exploring the depths of the human psyche. However, despite his impeccable reputation and scientific credentials, Jung's interest strayed towards the esoteric, the unconscious, and the spiritual nature of mankind. Jung was fascinated by ancient Greek philosophy, alchemy, and other occult spiritual traditions, and was deeply curious about the purpose and destiny of humanity. His life and career unfolded during a great period of turbulence in human history, much like today, where the world was on the brink of war and traditional social principles were being challenged. This only served to spur Jung on to delve deeper into the unconscious through dream analysis, as he felt something was deeply at odds within the collective unconscious, and that this was being reflected back in the form of war, human suffering, and the cultural maladies that surrounded him. Nowhere was this tension and polarity more reflective than in Jung's relationship with Sigmund Freud, who was once one of his closest colleagues. Inevitably, their relationship became strained due to their conflicting views on the nature of the psyche. Freud advocated for a strictly materialist approach, emphasizing the individual and mechanical nature of the psyche, and placing a heavy emphasis on the sexual theory of the mind. In contrast, Jung began to develop theories about the collective nature of the unconscious and the existence of an immortal soul beyond space and time, an energy that he called the self. This philosophical divergence led to a major rift in their relationship and put Jung's reputation as a scientist and psychiatrist in jeopardy. Freud even went as far as to accuse Jung of unleashing, quote, a black tide of mud and of occultism, unquote, on the profession. Jung's departure from Freud was but a mere symptom of a greater crisis that he was undergoing, a reflection of the maelstrom that was brewing in humanity. In the aftermath of the collapse of the modernist narratives and the perceived death of God, Jung saw a void in the collective unconscious, a fissure that, if left unhealed, would lead to the downfall of our species. He knew that the balance between the material and the spiritual was askew, and that reconciliation of opposing forces, science and religion, society and the self, humanity and its shared destiny, was a matter of utmost importance. Jung beheld a world in the throes of a profound transformation, torn between the familiar comforts of tradition and the seductive call of the modern era. He sensed a deep disquiet in the collective psyche, a restlessness that defied the narrow confines of the Freudian materialist perspective. The burgeoning secular age, with its tumultuous upheavals and dizzying innovations, posed a series of unprecedented challenges to the human spirit. Jung perceived a yawning chasm between the surface-level phenomenon of the world and the hidden depths of the soul, a gap that threatened to undermine the stability of the individual and society as a whole. He saw the secular paradigm as a critical juncture in the evolution of humanity, a moment of great potential and danger. But without the proper tools to navigate the complexities and treacherous terrain of the psyche, he feared that the world would be plunged into chaos and despair. Through rationalism and secularism, the 20th century generated the nuclear age, but this paradigm did not arm humanity with the political, psychological, and spiritual tools to survive the nuclear age and prevent nuclear annihilation. The tension between the spirit of the times, the ephemeral currents of culture and social expectations, and the spirit of the depths, the ineffable mysteries of the unconscious, grew increasingly pronounced. This tension triggered a profound crisis, one that demanded a radical re-evaluation of our relationship to ourselves and the world. And so Jung set forth into the unknown, the uncharted territories of the unconscious, and he documented every step in the Red Book. It was a new prophetic word for a time of great turbulence, a beacon of hope in a dark, tumultuous age, a call to action to reconcile the polarities that are tearing the fabric of reality apart. But Jung was a pragmatic man. He knew his findings would be met with skepticism and derision by the scientific establishment. He kept the Red Book under wraps, waiting for the right moment to unleash it upon the world. He knew that the foundations of analytical psychology were firmly rooted in ancient mystical concepts like Gnosticism, alchemy, and Kabbalah. He also knew that revealing this knowledge too soon would tarnish the reputation of the field as a whole. It's absolutely mind-boggling to think about the fact that Carl Jung is not only the founder of the New Age, and I mean that in the profound sense, not in the yoga pants and crystal sense, and he's also the founding figure of analytical psychology. It's insane to think that these two worlds are deeply connected. The Red Book was released in 2009, decades after Jung passed, for this reason. And now the time has come. With technology breaking down barriers and polarities more imminent than ever, we are standing at the crossroads of history. Jung saw this moment as a critical juncture, a time when humanity would be forced to reconcile its differences or face the extremities of its polarities in their most harrowing manifestations. The messages contained within the Red Book are as relevant now as they were a century ago, and its release was no accident. Jung waited for the right moment, and that moment is now. So to wrap this up in more modern internet terms, Freud tried to cancel Jung for being too schizo and kicked him out of the fancy psychoanalytic group chat or whatever. So Jung created a fake burner account so that he could schizo post in peace. Basically, Red Book is humanity's most important schizo post, and Jung is humanity's most important schizo poster. In the realm of the unconscious, Carl Jung stumbled upon a haunting collection of parables that would come to be known as the 7 Sermons to the Dead. These sermons draw from the depths of Jung's private journals and are a testament to the merging of ancient Greek philosophy and Gnostic symbolism that lay within the Swiss psychiatrist's mind. The 7 sermons ended up making it into the Red Book and act as a summary of the book's experience. Through the guise of his inner guide Philemon, the representation of Jung's inner logos, the 7 sermons act as a harbinger of truth about the nature of the unconscious, delivered in the form of a Gnostic myth. Each sermon is a masterwork of symbolism, imagery, and language, delving into the great questions of human existence. In this video, I will be exploring the first of the 7 sermons. I'll be delving into its spiritual and psychological musings, and I'll also be attempting to demonstrate how its teachings provide profound insight into why our modern relationships to concepts like identity and the political spectrum are so flawed. The first sermon focuses on the concepts of eternity and creation. It explores the origins of polarities and offers advice on how we can navigate them. The first sermon begins through the lens of Jung's active imagination, and we witness the approach of the dead souls of humanity, a metaphor for the human spirits who have died before they could reconcile the polarities of faith and knowledge. These lost souls, caught in the climate of the death of God, are without solace in faith and without the knowledge to pass on to eternity in peace. They represent us, the offspring of the 20th and 21st centuries, torn between conflicting poles of meaning, unable to find peace in any epistemological sense. In the 7 sermons, Philemon delivers his teachings to these unquiet dead, offering them hope and a path to reconciliation of the impossible polarities that cause their existential crisis. Through Philemon's wisdom and guidance, the 7 sermons offer a path to greater understanding and liberation from the darkness of our collective unconscious. To begin with, we, the unquiet and spiritually starving dead souls of humanity, are first introduced by Jung's guide Philemon to the mysteries of the Gnostic pleroma. We are taken beyond common understanding into a cosmology of human consciousness, almost like trying to reveal the hidden binary code that exists behind the mundane happenings of reality. Philemon's Gnostic cosmology gives us a bird's-eye view of why polarities come into being and what the world would look like without them. Philemon, quote, "We call this nothingness or fullness the pleroma. Therein both thinking and being cease, since the eternal and the endless possess no qualities. No one is in it, for then he would possess qualities that would distinguish him as something distinct from the pleroma. In the pleroma there is nothing and everything. It is fruitless to think about the pleroma, for this would be self-disillusion." Philemon speaks of a realm where the polarities of life in the universe do not yet exist and have not yet come into being. The best way I can think of to describe the pleroma is the Sea of LCL represented in the anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion. In Evangelion, a group of occult scientists hatch a secret evil plan to return humanity to a state of non-being through a process they call human instrumentality. The Sea of LCL, like the Gnostic pleroma, represents eternity and the collective unconscious existing outside of space and time, a place where the rigid dichotomies of reality merge into one and cancel each other out. Even though there is no tension within the pleroma, there is also no potential, no becoming, and no growth. Philemon quote, "Creature is not in the pleroma. The pleroma is the beginning and the end of the creature. It covers it all over, so to speak. It pervades it, just as the sun pervades the air. Although the pleroma pervades us, we are not in it, just as a wholly transparent body becomes neither light nor dark through the light pervading it. But we are the pleroma, for we are enclosed in and part of the eternal and the endless. But we have no share therein, as we are infinitely removed from the pleroma, not spatially or temporally, but essentially, since we are distinguished from the pleroma in our essence as creation, which is confined within space and time." You may wonder, are we part of the pleroma? The answer is yes and no. We are indeed enclosed within and part of the eternal and the endless, yet infinitely removed in our essence as creation, confined by space and time. But the pleroma pervades us, just as the sun pervades the air. And although we are not in the pleroma, it is in us, for the smallest point in us holds the eternal and the endless. The sermon continues, and the dead inquire further into the nature of reality. Philemon then introduces a second realm, the realm of becoming, where qualities are bestowed upon creation and opposites emerge. Out of a created one comes the plurality and its opposites. Philemon then goes on to demonstrate a model of the cosmos. Think of it like a triangle, with the highest point being the pleroma and the base points being the qualities that emanate from it. In a state of non-being, qualities such as hot or cold do not exist. It is only when the pleroma's qualities seep into the realm of creation that opposites surface. That is why everything existing in the world of creation, and not in eternity, is subject to changes in its qualities. The self, existing in the realm of potential and growth, is subject to the laws of change that govern creation. In this regard, it is noteworthy that even though we hold on to fixed ideas and ideals, represented by the pleroma, we must acknowledge the self's propensity to change due to its location in the realm of creation. In the initial sermon, Philemon, Jung's inner logos, clarifies to the bewildered and polarized masses that creation embodies quality itself, which manifests in the form of polar opposites. Navigating life's complexities requires embracing wholeness and integrating the opposites of qualities, because creation embodies quality manifested in polar opposites. It is worth remembering that the pleroma lacks tension, but it also lacks potential and life. This is what makes the idea of human instrumentality that is presented in Neon Genesis Evangelion so monstrous and frightening. Philemon's first lesson in the 7 sermons prompts the dead, or us, to embrace the realm of becoming by achieving balance amidst the polarities of life. By refusing to embrace balance, we effectively separate ourselves from life. This realization constitutes the first step towards enlightenment and forms the foundation of Jung's reconciliation and integration framework within analytical psychology. Soon, the departed seek more counsel from wise Philemon, asking him about the origins of creation. Philemon quote, "Creation is but a mere distinction of the pleroma. It encompasses both creation and eternal death. It is eternal, ever present. The pleroma holds all, both differentiation and non-differentiation." Here, Jung's guide Philemon highlights that creation and death are integral parts of the pleroma, while creatures come into being and pass away. He delves into the concepts of differentiation and non-differentiation, with the latter representing the pleroma and possessing all qualities, while differentiation encompasses qualities to their extreme. Consider the state of non-differentiation as the concept of buildings, while differentiation encompasses the diversity of buildings, from tall skyscrapers to short cottages. Philemon continues, "Differentiation is the creature, for it is in his nature to differentiate. Also, man differentiates, for his essence is differentiation. He differentiates qualities of the pleroma that do not exist, but does so because of his own essence. He must speak of these non-existent qualities of the pleroma. The words of Philemon carry great weight, for they illuminate the connection between man and differentiation. Our existence as creatures sets us apart from the pleroma, leading to our innate tendency to differentiate ourselves and the world around us. This can be seen in the biblical myth of Adam naming the animals, using his powers as a conscious being to bestow qualities upon them and differentiate them from the chaos of the pleroma. Philemon's teachings suggest that to be alive, to be a creature existing in the realm of creation, is to constantly strive for individuality, to avoid merging with the eternal through differentiation. However, this differentiation should not be driven by the ego, but rather by our essence. The ego does play a role in the process as it develops consciousness, but it must be able to embrace all qualities without getting attached, and their opposites in order to achieve wholeness. Differentiation is our very nature, asserts Philemon. If we don't differentiate, we don't truly embrace this nature. We must make distinctions between the qualities. The urge to differentiate, Philemon explains, helps us to comprehend the qualities of things, and gives us the ability to collect together the fragmented pieces of reality. This process, when led by our essence and not our ego, gives us the ability to experience things without attachment, and also achieve a deeper understanding of their essence. This idea mirrors the concept of the shattering of the vessels in Kabbalah, a form of Jewish mysticism. The story goes that during the creation process, the vessels used to contain the divine light shattered, leading to fragmentation and imbalance in the world. It is the duty of humanity to restore balance and unity by repairing these vessels and channeling the divine light back into the world, embarking on a spiritual journey towards enlightenment and divine consciousness. Jung's concept of the transcendent essence or self further supports this idea. Through this mechanism, differentiation allows us to experience the opposites and their qualities without forming attachments. However, if the drive to differentiate manifests through the ego, it becomes distorted and clings to extremes. And this obstructs our souls from recognizing the unity beyond fragmentation and polarity. The souls of the departed, growing increasingly interested, ask Philemon what happens if they don't differentiate. He then warns them of the dangers of rejecting this urge. Philemon, quote, "If we don't differentiate, we move beyond our own essence, beyond creation, and fall into non-differentiation, which is the other quality of the pleroma. We fall into the pleroma itself and cease to be created beings. We lapse into eternity and the endless. This is the death of creature. Hence, our essence strives towards differentiation. This is called the principium individuationis. This principle is the essence of creature. This is why non-differentiation and non-distinction pose a great danger to the creature." Here, Philemon highlights why differentiation is so central to the nature of man, and why not abiding by this mechanism threatens us existentially. To not differentiate is to disappear into the pleroma and to no longer exist. In the grand cosmic tapestry that is our current cultural and political landscape, the status games, once reserved for the elite, have been thrust into the realm of the common man by the dominant influence of technology. This has resulted in the creation of various categories and labels based on one's job, race, one's sexuality, one's political beliefs, tastes and opinions that serve as evidence of our innate tendency to differentiate as conscious beings. Yet in this modern era, the impulse is driven by the ego rather than the transcendent self, leading to a world defined by these types or memes. Though these categories can bring order to an often confusing reality, they also carry great peril. To see a person sporting a trucker hat and view them as closed-minded, or to judge a person with blue hair and piercings as unstable, though these judgments may hold some truth, they leave the individual open to deconstruction and rejection by the larger society. The individual embodying differentiation is absorbed into the non-being of the type, losing their individuality in the process. The same applies to those who cast these types of judgments. It hinders the judge from seeing the essence of the person they are judging. Our natural inclination towards differentiation makes us weary of being defined by society and categorized into one of these types. This fear is rooted in a spiritual and existential understanding that such categorization feels like a form of obliteration to our essence. This is why fitting into society has become so challenging in the current climate of political polarization and division. When every aspect of our lives is imbued with connotation, these types become all the more powerful and insidious. Jung's inner guide, Philemon, speaks of differentiation as a way to impart qualities and distinctions onto the world, to bring order to chaos. But what happens when this drive for order becomes a force for division? Society splits into factions, each clinging to their own cultural signifiers, a desperate attempt to find purpose and meaning. But in this madness, we risk losing sight of our own humanity and our essence, succumbing to the fear of oblivion. Differentiation is the nature of man, a way of making oneself distinct from the crowd. The ego, driven by a fear of oblivion, strives to differentiate itself from the crowd, and the collective unconscious, represented by the pleroma. However, in our modern society where everything connotes type, legibility to the crowd makes an individual vulnerable to deconstruction by people who would weaponize it against them. And this negates their individuality into a stereotype or a group type. This is why the negative aspects of differentiation, such as racism or hating people for their political beliefs or their religious orientation, can be so destructive. They negate a person's unique essence, reducing them to nothingness by negating their distinctiveness. This is why it pisses me off when people compare me to Candace Owens, for instance, simply because I'm a black woman who's critical of the left. It doesn't matter that I'm not a right-wing talking head. It's done purposefully to reduce me, to negate my essence, to send me reeling back into the pleroma of a type. As the ego struggles to differentiate itself, the ego of the collective unconscious invents more legible groups, labels, and theories to make sense of the increasing differentiation. This leads to a state of stagnation and fear in our cultural sphere, where fitting in has become increasingly difficult in this current pick-a-side paradigm. For instance, the egoic right-wing perspective is driven by an ego that seeks to distinguish itself by insisting on its cultural, sometimes racial and ethnic, and economic superiority over others. Meanwhile, the ego of a left-wing perspective is propelled by an ego that seeks to differentiate itself by asserting its moral superiority, enlightenment, progressiveness, and heightened understanding of the masses, in comparison to those who cling to tradition and ontological security. Both views see the other as alien, threatening, and the source of all evil, blind to their own capacity for the same. This binary paradigm precludes the ability to appreciate the merits of social embeddedness and tradition, while simultaneously recognizing the need for an inclusive economy that promotes healthy cultural goals. When the ego dominates the differentiation process, there is no room for synthesis. Not all egalitarian values that became popular in the West were necessarily leftist values, according to the standards of the modern political spectrum. Reducing people to mere categories, such as left or right, annihilates their individuality and subsumes their unique and nuanced qualities under the sign of a label or a type. Reducing cultural or political issues to the same binary hinders the ability to see the larger picture and areas of convergence and synthesis. One cannot learn anything from anyone if they approach issues in this manner, and the ability to integrate reality and gain a fuller understanding of the situation is completely destroyed. The solution to the question at hand is individuation, the process of experiencing the qualities and the opposites without becoming ensnared by the ego. It's about striving for one's essence or one's self, and also allowing the essence of others to shine through without reducing them to a label. In a literal sense, it means taking actions and aligning yourself with things because it's what's right, not just because it aligns with your chosen view or tribal perspective. This allows one to differentiate between conflicting polarities without the ego becoming attached. To truly grasp this approach, one must take a similar attitude to the famous writer, occultist, and thinker Robert Anton Wilson. He once said this line that I find incredibly inspiring. He said, "I believe nothing but have many suspicions." This open-minded approach is crucial when approaching the questions of culture, life, and politics. If one does not strive for their essence, their soul, their being, then they lose their identity as a being in the realm of creation. Conversely, if one does not recognize the essence and the soul of others, you also strip them of their identity as beings in the realm of creation. But if one does embrace their essence and the essence of others, then they enter into the principium individuationis. This is the process of individuation, in which one experiences and understands the qualities without becoming attached, allowing them to become a whole one. This principle is also an integral part of both the foundations of Jungian and analytical psychology. Philemon continues to the dead, quote, "We must therefore distinguish the qualities of the pleroma. These elementary qualities are pairs of opposites. The most important of these pairs are the effective and the ineffective, the fullness and the emptiness, the living and the dead, the different and the same, the light and the darkness, the hot and the cold, force and matter, time and space, good and evil, the beautiful and the ugly, the one and the many. Our quality is differentiation, but as we are the pleroma itself, we have all these qualities in us. Since our nature is grounded in differentiation, we have all these qualities in the name and under the sign of differentiation. When we strive for the good and the beautiful, we forget our essence, which is differentiation, and we fall subject to the spell of the qualities of the pleroma, which are pairs of opposites. Here, Philemon reminds the dead that even though man's nature is differentiation, because we contain the pleroma itself, we have all the qualities within us. But since we exist in the realm of creation, we only contain these qualities under the rule and the sign of differentiation. This is why when our ego reaches for one quality, we often fall prey to the opposite. Philemon states that this is why when we try to strive for the good and the beautiful, we often fall prey to its opposite. Philemon quote, "We seek the good and the beautiful, yet we also grasp the evil and the ugly. For in the pleroma, they are one. But if we do the same in the name and under the sight of our own essence, which is differentiation, we separate ourselves from the good and the beautiful, and hence from the evil and the ugly, and thus we do not fall under the spell of the pleroma." This applies to political movements, campaigns, slogans, and cultural postures. When the ego dominates the process of differentiation, attachments form that hinder our view of the whole. The persona creates shadows, as the ego fails to acknowledge its own opposite characteristics. If the ego identifies only with the good and the beautiful, it will inevitably produce the opposite, falling prey to the spell of the pleroma. Most people who commit evil acts believe they are serving a higher good. They justify all kinds of atrocities in the name of ego-driven ideals. This intensifies the shadows and grows the evil as we fall deeper under the spell of the pleroma. As Hannah Arendt observed, this is the banality of evil. This is also the origin of Jung's concept of the shadow in his analytical psychology framework. By differentiating ourselves from the good and the beautiful, meaning recognizing that we have the ability to create the opposite, we can avoid falling under the spell of the pleroma and realize the truth that lies beyond polarities. This is the wisdom of Philemon, a reminder to us that the world we see is not the world that is. that the spell of the pleroma is always present, always lurking in the background, waiting for us to fall under its sway. But we don't need to be afraid, because with awareness and detachment, we can avoid the spell and live our lives in harmony with the pleroma, a true reflection of our cosmic nature. Since our nature is grounded in differentiation, we have all these qualities in the name and under the sign of differentiation, Philemon continues. The qualities belong to the pleroma, and we possess and live them only in the name and under the sign of differentiation. We must differentiate ourselves from the qualities. They cancel each other out in the pleroma, but not in us. Distinction from them saves us. Here, Philemon instructs the dead that it is imperative to differentiate yourself from the qualities of the opposites. Because the pleroma is rent in us, differentiation from the opposites literally saves us from ourselves. We must differentiate ourselves from beauty if we don't want to create ugliness. Look around you and what do you see? The qualities that make us who we are exist in a state of differentiation. It is this differentiation that is at the heart of our being, the thing that makes us unique, and the thing that sets us apart from one another. But in doing so, it also opens us up to pairs of opposites. But it's not all doom and gloom. These qualities that we possess are also what make us whole. We can only experience them through the process of differentiation. And it's that process that allows us to break free from the opposites and move forward. The key is to detach ourselves from these qualities while still experiencing them. It is about gaining conscious awareness and developing without becoming fixated. It's about breaking free from the constraints of the opposites and becoming our own unique selves, allowing others to be their own unique selves, and choosing what's right, meaning following the path of the transcendental self instead of the spirit of the times, and not allowing the pressures and expectations of our tribes to distort our quest for knowledge and understanding. The dead interject and ask a question. Quote, "You stated that difference and sameness are qualities of the pleroma, but what happens when we strive for uniqueness in the name of differentiation? Are we not being true to ourselves? And yet, do we inevitably succumb to uniformity when we aim for distinctiveness?" Philemon responds, quote, "Thus, if you strive for uniqueness or uniformity, you are chasing after your notions about the qualities of the pleroma, which are non-existent. In this pursuit, you fall into the pleroma and achieve uniqueness and uniformity concurrently. Your essence is differentiation, not your thoughts. Therefore, do not strive for what you perceive as uniqueness, but rather for your own essence. You should and can only strive for your own essence without harm. At bottom, there is only one aim, to pursue the essence within yourself. If you possess this aspiration, you would not need to know anything about the pleroma or its qualities, and yet, through your essence, you would reach the proper destination." In this passage, Philemon, through Jung, defines essence as intelligent. He refers to it as the self, which the Yoruba people call the Ori, or the head, the Greeks call the Logos, and the Taoists call the Great Tao. It is the part of ourselves beyond our ego's involvement that guides us through life. The self takes the lead in states of flow, sudden knowledge, synchronicities, muscle memory, and the like. When we let the self steer, we are directed towards the right course of action without causing harm. Philemon clarifies that our thoughts interfere with our essence, and that only the self can healthily differentiate. In this sense, the ego is linked to thought, which strives, while the self is that which is. It is the only aspect of ourselves that exists beyond striving. Reflecting or meditation permits us to connect with the self, enabling our essence to reveal its qualities. By doing so, we can reach higher levels of awareness and comprehension. To be aligned with the Logos, we must permit room for change. We must also allow room for doubt. But in a world which is subjected to the spirit of the times, things cannot change. We must maintain a fixed belief in concepts. There are too many vested interests in keeping concepts fixed and preserving our beliefs about the world. Our collective ego obstructs our connection to the logos and the self. It obstructs our path to higher channels of knowledge. During the Red Book experience, Jung left behind the spirit of the times and engaged with the spirit of the depths, the unconscious. Through this, he connected with his higher transcendental self and his inner logos in the form of Philemon. The 7 sermons were created through Jung's surrender to his inner logos, allowing him to become a channel for it. We too can access this power by viewing knowledge humbly as something that we can channel rather than something that we possess. And also extending that grace to others, no matter how differentiated they may appear. It is crucial to recognize that every person and every creation is a channel for divine knowledge. Our relationship with the Logos is completely messed up. If we respected the Logos and recognized it as a grace rather than an entitlement, we would also recognize that the Logos also works through people who we disagree with, even if you have to wade through piles of shit to get to it. The great philosopher of ancient Greece, Parmenides, left us with a pearl of wisdom that inspires me, one that can help us navigate the tempestuous tides of today. His fragments remind us to keep our minds sharp and inquisitive, and to avoid the trap of letting daily habits and societal pressures dull our senses so that we become mere echoes of our peers. Rather, he implores us to let our logos, the voice of the self, discern the much needed and debated questions arising from within. By surrendering to the collective will of our tribes and our groups, we relinquish our faculties and risk losing touch with the essence of truth itself. This same dynamic occurs on a societal level, ultimately stripping society of its soulfulness. The push for censorship, especially the censorship that's being pushed by the left these days, is a blatant disrespect to this process and a clear indication that the ego has become too attached to an outcome, obstructing the way of wholeness. If a society eliminates the beautiful unfolding of dialectics, there will be nowhere to turn to for understanding. When we reject the idea of each person being a soul, we destroy the power of dialectics entirely. To navigate dialectics is to allow things to exist within their essence, to accept the duality within the wholeness of all things. Attempting to censor or coerce or condemn others from a place of ego obstructs the path to understanding and prevents the attainment of wholeness. Instead, we must embrace the unity within us and understand the unity of all things to access the full power of dialectics. We are defined by our fear of annihilation, that terrifying notion of fading into nothingness, of being consumed by the pleroma. To stave off this dread, we take on strong identity markers, cling to our cultures, and any other method that allows us to differentiate ourselves. But this well-intentioned mechanism can easily spiral out of control once the ego becomes involved. In our pursuit to avoid our own demise, we've created a culture that is tearing us apart from the inside and providing us with the ammunition to annihilate others. I watched Evangelion for the first time last summer, and this is why my first try at the show had such a profound effect on me. The show presents humanity's collective, I can't say the word on YouTube, but you know what I mean. And this happens through a process called human instrumentality. We see all souls merge into one supersoul in the sea of LCL, similar to the pleroma. The show's events culminate in a deeply troubled young boy, Shinji, being forced to decide between accepting this fate or fighting to return to the realm of being and becoming. Shinji's struggle represents our collective struggle to reconcile the opposites in the realm of being and choose a life-affirming approach, rather than seeking comfort through sinking back into the pleroma. What is particularly distressing about this world, which was created by Hideki Anno during an intense period of depression and existential angst, is that it reflects the growing trend of alienation in our world a bit too vividly. In the world of Evangelion, Differentiation becomes so extreme that the bonds between humans are so fractured that we're no longer able to relate to each other or connect. One is infected with an almost morbid sympathy for the actions of the occult scientists who would embrace a life-rejecting philosophy and attempt to merge humanity's souls just to avoid the pain of loneliness and isolation in a world where people can no longer connect. The ending of Evangelion is bittersweet. Shinji inevitably rejects human instrumentality to return to the realm of the living. But by this time, most of humanity has dissolved into the pleroma. Evangelion is a harrowing cautionary tale about the kind of catastrophe we create, both on a societal and interpersonal level, when we fail to reconcile the polarities. If we differentiate too much, we forget that we are all united by the pleroma, and we sink back into the void. If we don't differentiate enough, we lose the potential for beauty and innovation, and we become a bland nothingness. Too much fragmentation threatens us with oblivion, and too much closeness threatens us with the same. Creation is about balance, and existing as a creature in creation is about seeking balance. I don't believe that the Red Book or the Seven Sermons hold all the answers to the problems of modernity. But I do believe they offer a means of asking the right questions about how to move forward as a collective. Unfortunately, right now we're not asking the right questions. We're caught up in the instinct to differentiate, to view other groups as completely alien from ourselves. In modernity, we're cut off from our ability to hear the voice of the soul, to self-evaluate, to individuate, and to piece back together the fragments of the self into a whole. If we continue down the path of ego, we will end up creating catastrophe. The first of the 7 sermons concludes, and the dead souls of humanity stalk away from the wise Philemon, more enlightened than ever about the nature of reality, eternity, and creation, but still hungry for more knowledge to ease their existential angst, until they return for Sermon 2. And so concludes my first foray into the enigmatic realms of the unconscious. The 7 Sermons' first testament is a revelation about the nature of reality and the polarities of existence. But it's also a grave warning about the dangers that lurk when our ego corrupts the natural course of creation. Our modern society, driven by the insatiable thirst for progress, seeks to reject the fundamental polarities of life, and this manifests in the increasingly escapist and life-rejecting relationship we have with technology. This same impulse towards self-annihilation can also be seen in the looming threat of nuclear war as the world's most powerful nations edge closer to the brink. A collective psyche that clings to the extremes of the polarities is inevitably drawn towards annihilation. Like the apocalypse brought about by human instrumentality in Evangelion, it seems as if our own inability to reconcile the polarities is edging us towards a similar fate. This notion may seem ominous, but it is a truth that Jung himself experienced in vivid dreams and visions towards the end of his life. In one such vision, he foresaw a great cataclysm that would spell the end of humanity, akin to the visions he had before the cataclysmic events of World War I and World War II.
Jung had a vision at the end of his life of a catastrophe. It was a world catastrophe.
I don't want to speak much about it. One of his daughters took notes and after his death gave it. And there's a drawing with a line going down, up and down, and underneath is the last 50 years of humanity. And some remarks about a final catastrophe being ahead. But I have only those notes.
Mm-hmm. What is your own feeling about it, the world
Well,
situation?
one's whole feeling revolts against this idea. But since I have those notes in a drawer, I don't allow myself to be too optimistic. I think, well, we have always had wars and enormous catastrophes, and I have no more personal fear much about that. I mean, at my age, if you have anyhow soon to go, so or so or so, egocentrically spoken. But the beauty of all the life, to think that the billions and billions and billions of years of evolution to build up the plants and the animals and the whole beauty of nature, and that man would go out of sheer shadow foolishness and destroy it all. I mean, that all life might go from the planet. And we don't know. On Mars and Venus, there's no life. We don't know if there's any life experiment elsewhere in the galaxies. And we go and destroy this. I think it's so abominable. I try to pray that it may not happen, that a miracle happens. When I saw him last, he had also a vision while I was with him, but there he said, I see enormous stretches, devastated, enormous stretches of the earth. But thank God it's not the whole planet.
Our fate then rests on our ability to confront and reconcile the polarities that plague us before we succumb to the spell of the pleroma and are consumed by nothingness. The importance of this work extends to all aspects of life, from the personal to the political to the cosmic. As the old Hermetic axiom goes, as above, so below. So let's begin the great work of uniting the polarities within us before it's too late. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you're a long-time subscriber, thank you so much for waiting so long for it to come out. I'm back making YouTube videos again after quite a long break, and I'm really excited to announce that this is going to be the first of many on the channel for the rest of the year. I'm planning on doing a 7-part series, this being number 1 in Jung's 7 Sermons to the Dead. There's a ton of material to get through and I'm super excited to dive into it, but I'm going to be interspersing it throughout the year on the channel because they're going to be very, very long videos, quite like this one. And I also want to be able to cover other topics during the year as well. I also mentioned I have a book club which I've started on Patreon, and I also do it with the patrons of my new podcast, Mystic in the Machine. And last summer we read Carl Jung's Red Book together, and that's kind of what inspired this video. And this time around the patrons have voted to tackle the Tao Te Ching. So if you'd like to join me for book club and read the Tao Te Ching along with us, or get access to the audio library of the recorded episodes, then feel free to join me on Patreon. Either join the Patreon of my podcast, Mystic in the Machine, or you could join the Angie Speaks Patreon. Either way, you get access to all the perks. Or if you just want to help support the channel and enable me to make more very long-form content like this, where I do in-depth analysis of all kinds of issues to do with society and culture and mysticism, feel free to shoot me some support on Patreon. It's always appreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you very soon with a new video. And if you miss me too much between videos, you can catch me every week. I stream live with my new podcast, Mystic in the Machine. All the links are in the description. Catch you later. Goodbye.